The whispers in the town of Redemption had the texture of grit and malice. They told Anna she was being sent to the mountain as a wife for Gideon, a man they spoke of as more beast than human, a ghost of the high crags who wrestled bears and drank whiskey for water. It was a cruel joke, a final act of spite from the town elders who saw her as a stain, a woman with no family and a past she couldn't outrun. They wanted to see her broken, swallowed by the wilderness. She was ordered to sign the document, her hand trembling as she traded her name for the promise of a roof, no matter how savage the man who lived under it. She expected a monster. She braced for a life of fear, a penance paid in a desolate cabin. So when the supply wagon finally creaked to a halt at the base of the trail, and the cabin door swung open, she held her breath, preparing for the roar, the stench, the brutish form of Gideon. Instead, a different man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered like a mountain man ought to be, but the wilderness had not made him wild, it had hollowed him out. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were vacant, haunted by a grief so profound it seemed to leach the color from the world around him. This was not the beast she was promised. This was his brother, Caleb. He did not look at her. He looked through her, his gaze fixed on some distant, painful memory. He took the paper from the driver, his signature a swift, angry slash of ink. A transaction. He had paid for a housekeeper, a caretaker for his child. The town had paid for a cruel joke. Anna, caught in the middle, was simply baggage. She climbed into the back of his wagon without a word, her small bundle of belongings held tight in her lap, the whispers of the town finally fading behind her as they began the silent, arduous journey up the mountain. The path to Caleb's homestead was less a road and more a scar carved into the stone flesh of the mountain. Every jolt of the wagon, every groan of the axles, seemed to echo the silent misery of the man driving it. Anna watched the back of his head, the rigid line of his shoulders a testament to the walls he had built around his heart. The air grew thinner, colder, scented with pine and an immense, lonely quiet. When they finally arrived, the cabin stood like a gravestone against the bruised twilight sky. It was well built, with strong logs and a sturdy stone chimney, but it was a place devoid of life. No smoke curled from the chimney, no light glowed in the windows. It was a shell. As Caleb unloaded her meager bag, the door creaked open and a small face, framed by a cascade of tangled dark hair, peeked out. A girl, no older than 6, with her father's winter sky eyes, wide with a fear that seemed too old for her years. This was Lily. Caleb gestured for Anna to enter, his first and only communication since the journey began. The inside of the cabin was a portrait of neglect. A fine layer of dust coated every surface, a shroud over what was once a home. A cold hearth, choked with grey ash, sat at its center. Dishes were piled in a basin, and a man's coat lay discarded over a chair, frozen in the shape of a slump. It wasn't a home, it was a place where a man and a child were waiting to fade away. Anna understood then that the cruelty of the town's joke was not in the man she was sent to, but in the profound, suffocating sorrow she was now contracted to inhabit. She was not a wife, not even a servant, but a witness to the slow, silent death of a family. In the days that followed, Anna moved through the cabin like a ghost with a purpose. She did not speak, for there were no words that could fill the chasm of grief that defined the space. Instead, she let her hands do the talking. She began with the hearth. She swept out the old, cold ash, her movements methodical, respectful, as if tending to a grave. She laid a new fire, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of warmth and light pushed back against the encroaching shadows. Orange light danced on the dusty floorboards, revealing the geography of long-held sorrow. She then turned to the rest of the house, her silence a gentle counterpoint to the howling wind outside. She washed the dishes, the clink of pottery a small, defiant sound in the oppressive quiet. She aired out the stale blankets, beating the dust from them until they smelled of pine and cold mountain air. In a dusty corner, she found a half-finished quilt, its intricate pattern of interlocking stars abandoned mid-stitch. A woman's work. A life interrupted. Anna picked it up, her fingers tracing the faded colors. She found a needle and thread in a forgotten sewing basket and, sitting by the newly lit fire, she began to stitch. She didn't try to mimic the original hand, she added her own neat, simple stitches, bridging the gap between what was and what could be. From his chair in the corner, Caleb watched her. His face remained a mask of indifference, but his eyes, those hollowed-out winter skies, followed the rhythmic dip and rise of the needle. He was watching her mend more than just a quilt. He was watching her mend the very fabric of his broken world, stitch by painful stitch. The first scent of real food to fill the cabin in months was that of a simple rabbit stew. Anna had found one of Caleb's traps sprung during a brief walk, the creature a small offering from the unforgiving mountain. She prepared it with the few wild herbs she could find, their roots clinging stubbornly to the frozen ground. The aroma of simmering broth, onion, and thyme was an alien presence in the home, a language of care and sustenance it had long forgotten. When she placed a bowl before Caleb, he stared at it as if it were a relic from another life. He picked up his spoon, his movement stiff, and took a tentative bite. He did not compliment it, did not offer a word of thanks, but he ate every last drop, the scraping of his spoon against the bottom of the wooden bowl the loudest sound in the room. Anna served Lily next, placing a smaller bowl before the child. Lily, who had been a silent observer of Anna's quiet campaign of domestic restoration, looked from the stew to Anna's face. She ate slowly, her large, solemn eyes never leaving Anna. The meal was consumed in the same heavy silence that had greeted her upon arrival, but something had shifted. It was no longer the silence of absence and neglect. It was the silence of consideration, of observation. It was the quiet of a seed buried deep in frozen earth, waiting for the first sign of a thaw. Later that evening, as Anna sat by the fire, continuing her work on the quilt, she felt a presence beside her. It was Lily, standing just at the edge of the firelight, her small hands clutching something to her chest. The child did not speak, but her steady gaze was a question, an assessment, a fragile tendril of curiosity reaching out across the cold, empty space that separated them all. The offering, when it came, was small and worn smooth by tiny, anxious hands. Lily stepped fully into the firelight, her bare feet silent on the wooden floorboards. She held out her hand, uncurling her fingers to reveal a small bird, crudely carved from a piece of pale pine. Its wings were uneven, its shape rudimentary, but it had been made with love. "Mama made birds," Lily whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. It was the first time she had spoken directly to Anna, the words a key turning in a long rusted lock. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of the girl's admission, a shared secret about the woman whose ghost still occupied every corner of the cabin. Anna looked from the bird to the child's searching eyes. She carefully set aside the quilt and held out her own hand, palm up. Lily hesitated for a heartbeat, then gently placed the wooden bird in Anna's palm. Anna's fingers closed around it, the wood still warm from the child's grasp. "It's beautiful," Anna said, her own voice soft. "Thank you." That small exchange was a bridge. It was the first stone laid across the chasm of their shared loneliness. Later that week, as a storm began to gather on the horizon, rattling the window panes, Lily found Anna folding a freshly mended shirt of Caleb's. The child stood close, her presence no longer tentative. She looked around the cabin, at the clean floors, the warm hearth, the scent of fresh pine boughs Anna had placed on the mantel. "Are you staying to fix the quiet?" Lily asked. The question was so simple, so profoundly innocent, it struck the air like a chime. Caleb, who had been cleaning a rifle by the door, went still. His hands froze, his head bowed. Anna saw the muscles in his jaw clench. The child's question hadn't just been for her. It was an arrow aimed straight at the heart of his grief, a plea from his own daughter to let the light back in. The storm did not just gather, it descended. It fell from the sky like a shroud of ice and fury, a physical manifestation of all the grief the cabin held. The wind shrieked, clawing at the logs with talons of frozen air. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding, horizontal torrent that erased the world, sealing them inside their fragile shelter. The mountain, which had been a silent, stoic neighbor, was now a roaring beast intent on swallowing them whole. The world shrank to the four walls of the cabin, the fire in the hearth their only defense against the crushing cold. For 2 days, they were prisoners of the blizzard. The forced proximity was a crucible, burning away the comfortable distances they had maintained. The silence returned, but it was different now, charged with the tension of survival. Every howl of the wind seemed to scrape away another layer of Caleb's stoic facade, leaving him raw and exposed. He would stand for hours at the single window, staring into the white maelstrom as if searching for something he had lost out there. Anna knew he wasn't looking at the snow. He was looking at the memory of another storm, another loss. On the third night, the storm's fury found a new target. Lily began to cough, a dry, rasping sound that cut through the howl of the wind. By morning, a fever burned in her small body, her cheeks flushed a dangerous red against the pale white of her skin. Anna saw the look in Caleb's eyes. It was not just fear. It was stark, undiluted terror. The terror of a man watching a nightmare he had already lived begin to unfold for a second time. He was frozen, trapped in the ice of his own memory. As Lily's fever climbed, Caleb became a statue of helpless despair. He stood by her small cot, his large hands clenched into useless fists, his face a mask of agony. He was lost in the past, seeing not his daughter, but his wife, slipping away from him in just such a storm, in this very room. The memory had paralyzed him, rendering him incapable of action. It was Anna who moved. A quiet strength, born of her own forgotten traumas, rose within her. She was no stranger to sickness and loss, and she would not stand by and watch this child be consumed by it. She gently moved Caleb aside, her touch on his arm a silent command. "Boil water," she said, her voice calm and steady, cutting through his panicked inertia. While he numbly obeyed, she retrieved the small bundle of dried herbs she had carried with her, a meager inheritance from a past she never spoke of. She crushed willow bark for the fever and steeped elderflower for the cough, the fragrant steam a small act of defiance against the sickness. She bathed Lily's forehead with cool water, her hands gentle, her whispers soothing. For hours she worked, a tireless sentinel in the dim, flickering light. Late into the night, with the wind still raging outside, Caleb finally broke. He sat heavily in a chair, his head in his hands. "Her name was Sarah," he said, the words torn from his throat. "The fever took her, in a storm just like this. I couldn't stop it." The confession hung in the air, a raw, bleeding wound. Anna didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply dipped a cloth in the cool water, wrung it out, and placed it back on Lily's brow. In that moment of shared vulnerability, watching over the sleeping child, the last of the ice around Caleb's heart began to crack. He was no longer just watching a hired woman, he was watching a partner in a desperate fight, a quiet force holding his world together. The blizzard broke as suddenly as it had arrived. The wind died, leaving behind a world of stunning, silent white. The sun, when it appeared, was brilliant, casting long blue shadows across the immense drifts of snow. Inside the cabin, Lily's fever had also broken. She slept peacefully, her breathing even, the flush gone from her cheeks. A fragile peace settled over the small home, the exhaustion of their ordeal replaced by a tentative, shared relief. They had survived. But the mountain was not done with them. As the sun reached its zenith, a new shape appeared against the blinding snow. A man on a powerful black horse, moving with an arrogance that churned the pristine landscape. It was Gideon. He was larger than Caleb, broader, with a wild, untamed beard and eyes that held a casual cruelty. He was the beast from the town's whispers, made real. He dismounted without an invitation and pushed open the cabin door, bringing a blast of cold air and a sneer with him. "Heard the good folk of redemption sent me a wife," he boomed, his gaze landing on Anna, raking over her with dismissive appraisal. "You're cleaner than I expected," he laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Looks like little brother got to the present first." He took a step toward her, his intentions clear. Before he could take another, Caleb moved. He rose from his chair, not with the frantic energy of fear, but with the slow, deliberate certainty of a landslide. He placed himself directly between Gideon and Anna, his body a solid, unmovable wall. For the first time since she had arrived, Caleb stood to his full height, the hollowed-out grief replaced by a cold, protective fire. "She is my wife," Caleb said. The words were not loud, but they resonated with the unyielding strength of mountain iron. "This is her home. You are not welcome in it." Gideon froze mid-stride, his sneer faltering. He looked from Anna to the fierce, unfamiliar set of his brother's jaw. He had come expecting to taunt a broken man and claim a cast-off woman. He had not expected to find a fortress. He saw the shift in Caleb, the sudden spine of steel where there had only been sorrow. He saw the way Caleb's body shielded Anna, a clear, primal declaration of ownership and protection that had nothing to do with a piece of paper signed in town. The beast of the mountain was, for a moment, taken aback by the quiet man who had found his roar. "Your wife." Gideon scoffed, trying to regain his footing, but the word sounded hollow even to his own ears. The truth of Caleb's statement was palpable in the small cabin. It was in the completed quilt on the bed, in the lingering scent of herbal remedies, in the sleeping child who had been nursed back from the brink. This was a home, and Anna was its heart. Caleb didn't flinch. He just stood there, a silent sentinel, his eyes locked on his brother's. There was no anger in his gaze, only a simple, immutable fact. After a long, tense moment, Gideon let out a short, humorless laugh. He shook his head, turned without another word, and strode out of the cabin, mounting his horse and disappearing back into the blinding white. He had been defeated not by a threat of violence, but by the quiet, unshakable power of a family already formed. The crisis had passed. Caleb turned slowly, his gaze finding Anna's. The space between them, once a chasm of silence and grief, was now charged with a new, unspoken understanding. He walked toward her, his eyes holding hers, and reached out, not to touch her, but to take the mended shirt she was still holding. His fingers brushed against hers, a brief, electric touch that sent a jolt of warmth through her. In that single, fleeting contact, 1,000 words were spoken. He saw her. He finally, truly, saw her. The seasons turned on the mountain. The great thaw came, and the world was reborn in a riot of green and birdsong. The snow melted, feeding rushing creeks that sang a new song of life. Inside the cabin, a similar transformation had taken hold. The last of the shadows had been banished by the steady glow of the hearth and the clear light that now streamed through clean window panes. The air was thick with the scent of baking bread and drying wildflowers. The quilt Anna had finished now lay across the bed they shared, a tapestry of old and new, of sorrow mended and a future stitched together. Their life fell into a rhythm, as steady and natural as the rising sun. It was a life of shared work and comfortable silence, a silence that was no longer empty but full of understanding. Words were still sparse, but they were no longer needed. A glance across the dinner table, the passing of a tool, the simple act of him placing a log on the fire she had built, these were their conversations, their poetry. One sun-drenched afternoon, Anna stood in the doorway, watching Caleb as he sat on the porch steps. In his hands was a block of wood and his whittling knife. He was carving, his movements sure and practiced. He was not carving a bird this time, but a small, intricate flower, a mountain columbine. Lily played nearby, her laughter a constant, joyful melody against the whisper of the wind in the pines. She was no longer a pale, fearful ghost, but a vibrant child, her cheeks rosy with sun and happiness. Caleb finished his carving, the delicate wooden petals perfect in their detail. He looked up and saw Anna watching him, a soft smile on her face. He held it out to her, an offering. She walked to him and took it, her fingers closing over his for a moment longer than necessary. He did not pull away. His hand turned, capturing hers. It was a simple, profound gesture. A promise. He had paid for a stranger, the town had sent an outcast, but the mountain had given them both a home. Together, they had fixed the quiet.